The Lord said, "Beware of false pod boys, who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are ravening idiots." Hello, brothers and sisters. I'm Matisse Van Rossum, and I've been impudent again.
I'm your Reverend Ben Sheets.
I'm the boy y'all love to hate, Cleveland Mosier.
And this day, we're coming at you with a blast from the past, a classic film, Cleveland's choice for the week, The Night of the Hunter.
Well, Tease, I reckon you might even say it's a blasphemy from the past for me.
I couldn't have put it better myself, Brother Cleve.
Well, thank you, Brother Tease.
Now it just sounds like you're doing Elvis.
Well, I reckon I am.
Now, even though this was your pick, Cleve, you're the only one of us who has not seen this movie before.
That's correct.
I know that it's something that Ben and I have been recommending to you for a long time, and I sure hope it didn't disappoint.
Oh, thank you for this gift. I loved every bit of this film. It was
I know. I figure out of all of us, you are the one who should have seen it.
It's so true.
Over the two of us. But
well, that's the thing, because this movie is an American classic, but in a lot of ways is overlooked in the canon.
100%.
And that's mainly because of a few trappings, you know, whether it's Charles Laughton only directing this movie, nothing else, and that being kind of overshadowed by his acting career.
Yeah, absolutely.
Doing all those Shakespearean works, or this movie, when it came out, being a commercial and critical failure. But it has gotten acclaim since then, and I think it deserves every bit of it.
Reading in the credits after the movie that we were watching the Criterion Blu-ray version, and I saw that they credited Martin Scorsese as one of the people who was responsible for the restoration for this print in 2001. And Scorsese's not the only pretty big director who will cite this movie as like one of the...
yeah, it's incredibly influential. Yeah. From the iconography, you know, the love and hate, you see that in stuff like Do the Right Thing.
Yeah.
To just the cinematography and the style.
Stanley Cortez, the fucking big boy OG. This movie is so fucking well shot. This is like the movie in film school that made me want to focus on cinematography, and it looks so goddamn good.
Yeah.
It's such a rich film in nearly every perspective, from the acting to the scoring to the cinematography to the writing. No stone is left unturned if there's something in a shot, even, you know, something as small as a watch in a window.
Yeah.
It's used in some way.
There's a high degree of care and detail in this movie. It did come out in 1954, and as Ben said, it's the only film ever directed by Charles Laughton, who is has a legendary acting career, but this was like a passion project for him, and it just completely flopped.
Yeah, it's based on a book, too, which I have not read.
No, me either.
I'd be curious, too.
But audiences hated it when it came out. Critics hated it. It was just, like, universally panned to the extent that it completely dissuaded Charles Laughton from ever making another film.
I can't blame him.
It was his first, and it received such negative feedback that he said, "I'm never directing another film again." For a first film to direct, like, this is such like a golden standard. I can only imagine, like, if he had directed other films, like what they would have been like with him, you know, learning and growing as a filmmaker. Because, like, this is a hell of a place to start. And it's really sad that it didn't really get the appreciation it deserves until after he died. He went to his grave still thinking that The Night of the Hunter was a mistake. And that's such a shame.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because if you look at, like, the noirs of the time, of the mid-50s, you can kind of understand why it was a commercial failure in some respects, just because it goes so against the grain of realism and kind of the no-nonsense type of movies that were super popular. Granted, in the 50s, the more expressionistic style was coming in, but it didn't really kick off at this point, and it's a shame because this movie, the expressionism of it is one of its best parts.
And like really when you bring up such a good point, because when you think of noir films of this era and like even the late 40s and coming into the 50s, you think of like the gumshoes detective investigating a mystery with a, you know, some sort of conspiracy and a femme fatale. You know, there's a very specific blueprint for like what you consider a noir film, and this film goes against that completely, aside from the stylization.
Well, when two children are your protagonists,
right?
That's well unheard of for a noir film in particular, something that's often, you know, portrayed as so dark.
I would say that Robert Mitchum is just as much of a protagonist as the children, but he's so evil. I mean, technically he's an antagonist, but he gets as much focus and screen time as the children.
Right.
You know, in that way, the film is very much, it's about him too.
And he really steals the show.
Oh
my
yeah,
God.
well, I mean, Robert Mitchum is one of the greatest actors of all time, in my opinion, and this is like a completely magnetic performance.
Mm-hmm. It's chilling. And to put a nice nail on the reception of this film, it has so much social commentary that I could just not see going over well at that time.
Totally.
When your villain, first off, your villain's a preacher.
Right.
And not only is he a purely villainous preacher, he's a relatively believably villainous preacher.
Yeah.
All of the characters in this film are addressed as with a sense of realism. They're often hammed up and they're framed very artificially.
I mean, the children are also bad actors.
I thought they did a good job. I thought for what was required, they met everything.
Okay, Pearl is awful.
I thought she was great.
They both have some bad reactions
really bad,
at times.
Yeah. But it's believably so, I think. From a bad acting perspective, it doesn't really bother me.
The children never like rubbed me the wrong way. I was never bothered or left feeling like they were obnoxious. I was always concerned for them.
Their performances are very hammy, but in a way, like, I almost think that the bad acting sort of adds to the innocence of the children. The movie is so much about the struggle of good versus evil and love and hate as it is written on Robert Mitchum's hands, and as he mentions multiple times in the film. And to have like these sort of like naive, innocent characters that are also naive in the sense that they're just dog shit at acting, it makes a good foil for like Robert Mitchum, who is an incredible actor but is also playing like the corrupt evil character. And much of his character is acting. He comes under the guise of a preacher, but he has more sinister intentions, you know?
Oh, yeah.
And one thing that I think is interesting about this film too is that like you don't really start talking about like serial killer films until like the end of this decade, with like Peeping Tom and like Psycho. Those are pretty widely considered like really the films that like kick off the serial killer subgenre. But like this is a serial killer film.
Most definitely.
Yeah.
Like they even say that like we start with seeing Robert Mitchum driving in this old Model T, and he's like talking to God and asking like, how many women has it been now? 6, 12? I've lost count.
Yeah.
And when they capture him at the end and he's put on trial, they say that he's married and murdered 25 women to steal their money. So like he is legitimately a serial killer, and like this film is not, you know, most people don't consider it in the serial killer canon.
Well, it fits.
It fits
right in, and I love it too because it's always sort of underplayed. They don't draw too much attention to him being a serial killer. He doesn't fit a lot of the standard hallmarks that were hemmed on serial killers of that era.
Right.
He doesn't come across as a lunatic. He's a sociopath. He plans all of his actions out, and only once or twice does he lose his temper or his cool in the film.
But it's only when he knows that he's able to let that guard slip. It's only when he's around the kids.
Well, like even when he's around the kids. Like
yeah.
There are several sequences, like when he has the meal splayed out for them, or when he's at the top of the staircase to the cellar and he says, you know, I will lose my temper. I'm
Right.
going to lose my temper. And he says it with that reptilian coldness. And there's no emotion in his voice, but yet he's saying like he's going to fly into a rage. And it's so calculated. Oh, God. Ugh, it gave me the shivers.
Yeah, well, in a lot of ways, his character is believably a religious zealot too. Like,
Totally.
he has that crazed sociopath tinge to him, where like a lot of the things he decides to do are for his own ends.
He always finds a way to give religious significance to it. Like,
Yeah.
That, like, God is giving him permission. Like, when he says in the car at the beginning, when he's driving past the cemetery, and he says, he's like, oh, Lord, I know you don't mind the killings. Your book is full of killings.
Yeah.
So, like, even, like,
He's not wrong.
The fact, well, no, it's not. Like, the Old Testament God is a fucking asshole. Like, but the fact that we see him alone and he's also like talking to God, I think it does, like you said, Ben, it does show that he believes his sort of twisted sense of religious morals, you know?
And we get that excellent scene with the mother, where she's giving her testimony in front of the little crowd about how she was to blame
for her husband.
Yeah.
Essentially, we haven't really talked about the premise. The idea is that the little kids, John and Pearl, their father robs a bank, and before he is caught and arrested, he hides the money. He gives them the money to hide somewhere, and he ends up in jail with Robert Mitchum, with Harry Powell, the preacher. And after Robert Mitchum gets out, he has heard this man talking about the money that he's hidden, the $10,000 that he's hidden. And so he goes to the guy's town and sort of like worms his way in and marries his widow under the pretenses of trying to find the money. And we see that only the children know where the money is.
Yes. I, in particular, love the father's motivation. He wasn't just trying to get the money, and he didn't kill, like, I believe 2 people.
Yeah, he killed 2 people,
to acquire, like, this $10,000 for the motivation of helping his family exclusively. Yeah. It was seeing all of the orphan vagabond children, you know, during the Great Depression, like during this era, and not wanting that for his own family. And
that's why he gives the money to his son to hide. And he says, I'm going to give it to you rather than your mom.
Right, not even his wife.
Yeah, he's like, I'm going to give this to you instead of your mom. She doesn't have any common sense like you do. Which, I mean, kind of a shitty thing to say, but
also kind of true.
But also, he's right.
Yeah.
We see that she very easily falls under Robert Mitchum's sway, to the point that he has her believing that she is responsible for her husband robbing the bank and killing those people.
And what I love is that I was a little concerned towards the first half of the film of the portrayal of women. The first half of the film, all the women you see are responsible for furthering the agenda of Robert Mitchum.
Right.
And through acts of dipshittery
yes.
as well. But
yeah, Shelley Winters plays the wife, and she is very stupid.
Right. And even Pearl is, with reason, you know, like a hitch in the plot. Like she causes more harm than good.
Right. Well, she's like a 4-year-old. Yeah.
Yeah. So she would, and that's believable. But up until the 2/3 of the way through this film, even especially the granny at the ice cream parlor, they're all miserable ladies. They're all worthless. And I was like, oh, you know, this isn't like a great through line of a message. And then at the very end, you get this ideal character.
And then you get Lillian Gish's character, who comes in and puts all that shit on its head, because she is like the most badass person in this movie. She's great.
I want to make clear, I'm not saying like she's the ideal woman. She's the ideal like person to appear in, you know, for the sake of the writing. Her first interaction with the kids is like whipping them up to her house so because they need a bath.
Yeah, she's this
like she spanks and whips them like several times. Like, she's a farmhouse mother, if there ever was.
She's this older woman who we learn is sort of estranged from her own like grown children, who never really come around anymore, and so she has taken to sort of like adopting all of these kids orphaned by the Great Depression, and she's just continually taking people in. So when John and Pearl wash up on her riverbank in the skiff because they've been fleeing Robert Mitchum Mitchum, she just takes them right in and protects them.
And the hardness of her character and the sharpness leads you to organically theorize that her children are estranged from her potentially because of her own actions, and that she's seeking this for redemption. She never says that directly.
You certainly get the impression, though, I think.
I said something similar about Midsommar, and it's for such a film that is so staged, that's so noir and, you know, is perfectly framed and artificial. It does such a good job of presenting events to you organically, that being an example of one. And then another being the jars in the cellar. It's a very small thing, but I loved it. There's a moment when the children are hiding in the cellar from Robert Mitchum, and they bump a shelf that has jars over it. And it's just a quick shot, just a little thing. You're concerned because the sound of the jars is going to, you know, alert Mitchum, which it does. And then later on, the son lures him down there, and he kicks out the board from under the jar, and under the board, and all the jars and the shelving fall on Mitchum.
On Robert Mitchum's
and
head,
I enjoyed that, because any other film, especially from that era, but even now, would go so much farther, either out of its way to show it or to not bother with it and just have it be a set piece. But we get just the right amount, because I saw the jars and I thought, okay, cool, they've served their purpose, moving on. But they gave me a better sense of like the spacing of the cellar, and then we get this nice payoff with them at the end.
The way things are set up is really intentional in this movie in a good way. I do want to go back to the role of women in this movie a little bit.
No, there's lots to unpack there.
Just because I think this movie can be read as a little misogynistic, but I actually read it as more of a comment on societal roles of the time. Mm-hmm. You especially get this with, I'll call her Old Lady Ice Cream.
Oh, yeah, Mrs. Spoon.
Yeah, which
Mrs. Spoon
works for Old Lady Ice Cream.
It's the same name.
She really pushes the mother to get remarried as fast as possible.
Like, the father's body is, like, still warm.
Right.
Yeah.
Essentially.
And fucking Mrs. Spoon is saying stuff like, a woman can't raise children on her own, she needs a man, like...
Let a lady grieve!
Right. Yeah, and also, like, saying in front of the kids, like, he was never good for her anyway, she needs to, like, you're not getting any younger, you need to find somebody new fast, and here's this perfect devout preacher man.
There's generally very little sympathy for the father.
Yeah, very much so.
Since he's a convicted and hung murderer.
Yeah.
Like, there's very little empathy towards that. In fact, like, one of the first sequences we get after he's been taken care of, to say the least, is a group of kids singing a Hangman song
in the playground.
Yeah.
Fuck, that's so brutal.
While John and Pearl just sort of stand there watching.
They're singing it at them. And then they're drawing like a chalkboard image on a fence post, which is great because like
of a hangman, a hung man,
hangman, which is cool because during the Depression, like hobos would use like chalk and scratch marks, so it's kind of fun seeing that.
And considering that Shelley Winter's character is shown to be pretty naive and not the brightest, like, she's very much brainwashed by all of these societal pressures into marrying Robert Mitchum immediately, which is, of course, exactly what he wants. His character is a great actor as well, you know, he's charming, he's devout, you know, he's kind, he's a great hunter, you know, it is the night of the hunter, he knows how to trap these people. Similarly, in that vein with the societal pressures, I feel like this is definitely a film that, like, is very heavily allegorical, lots of straight references from the Bible, but I also feel like, especially in the first half, it is equally critical of Christianity as it is sort of supporting the basic tenets by the end.
This film does a great job, both when it comes to addressing societal stuff, as you were bringing up earlier, and religious aspects.
Yeah.
And like the aspects of the elements of sex as well. Does a great job of playing both sides of the field.
Right.
This is a very aware film.
Lillian Gish's character plays a perfect foil because, you know, Henry is someone who uses the word of the Lord for his own sociopathic evil means.
He uses it to justify what he does.
And on the other hand, Lillian Gish's character, she really lives the word of the Lord
Right.
And she's, a very pure and good character who takes the needy in. And
she's selfless. She's a good Samaritan. Yeah,
she's not doing it for herself. And I think that's the perfect way to approach it, because you get to go into some of that criticism of how religion can be used for selfish
how oftentimes
means.
People will just interpret religious writings in whatever way suits their needs best, rather than like really just reading the messages of the stories. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Lillian Gish like really personifies like the idea of being a quote unquote good Christian, whereas like Robert Mitchum is obviously the
bad Christian,
right? Well, with Lillian Gish's voiceover at the very beginning, like she's straight up warning about false prophets, and then it cuts straight to Robert Mitchum, so like that's very obvious.
But even the religious equivalent of the seed of crime bears bitter fruit.
But even so, like seeing how easily Shelley Winters like falls under his sway, and that he already has like a congregation in the town when he comes in, and even like old lady Spoon and her husband, like how everything they're saying is like, oh, the Lord, is guiding you to do this, the Lord says do this, and like just how easily all of these like so-called Christians are willing to do very unchristian things, to the extent that even at the end, when Robert Mitchum has been captured and tried, the same people get whipped up into a frenzy and form a lynch mob.
Well, the beauty of that is the opening quote is very specifically, a sinful tree will bear evil fruit and a good tree will bear good fruit. A good tree does not bear evil fruit. Judge a tree by its fruit.
Right.
Or there's judge a man by his actions.
Exactly.
And all of the people judge Robert Mitchum for the tree he portrays himself to be, but not for his actions.
Exactly.
And I love that. Like, it's so well, and it pans in on him, driving in his car during that opening sequence. We're given everything we need, and it's done poetically.
That's a great way to put it. I really agree. And I think the way it's approached in the movie, it almost feels like a fable, the movie itself, especially with the expressionism and the style and the dreaminess of it all.
Yeah.
To the point where
it's like a parable.
Yeah, exactly. And I think we mentioned some of the bad kids acting, but I think the style of this movie masks a lot of that. True. Because it is definitely a fable bigger than reality.
Right. Well, and like I said too, like bad acting sort of carries with it this sort of connotation of like naivete and innocence, because like to be a good actor, you have to understand your character, and a lot of kids just aren't capable of that, especially in this era. Like a lot of child actors were just dog shit. But I think that considering the subject matter of the film and the struggle between innocence and corruption, the bad acting kind of heightens that a little bit. Very strong parallels, I think.
Well, especially once the children escape and they make their way down the river, the film takes an even more like storybook approach to its cinematography. Totally. You get the interluding shots of creatures, and the backdrop becomes a much more of an apparent set with the artificial starry night over them.
The silhouettes. This film like does silhouettes so incredibly.
It's my favorite stuff. I've got chicken skin.
Now. On top of that, we mentioned the cinematography quite a bit because it is so stark, high contrast with the strong blacks. But we also have a lot of use of compositing in this movie, which I think works super well. You get these amazing deep focus shots where they're just layering projections over each other.
It's easier to spot on the Blu-ray having such a high resolution. Like you can definitely tell what is composited, but it's like a double-edged sword because like that resolution also makes some of those shots just look chef kiss.
Oh, well worth
insanely beautiful.
I love the compositing though.
I think it works.
I think it works with the style they're going for in the movie. And on top of that, I think especially with some of the shots, you get an overall better image than you would just by itself.
I love that shot of Robert Mitchum in the foreground on the riverbank, and it's like composited with the picnic happening behind him. The behind image is all like sunny and beautiful, but like he's got this like really moody, like dark lighting across his face, and the light reflection from the water like
he's got that black cowboy hat too.
Yeah.
Like, oh,
his costume is great.
It's real good
with the old fashioned sort of like bow tie, like literal bow, and like you said, the hat.
It's that Doc Holliday get up. I just love it.
And the finger tattoos, the love and hate.
Yeah.
And his iconic switchblade. Yeah. There's so much good design stuff in this movie.
Yeah, we could talk for days.
Yeah,
there's unpacking this film.
There's a few shots that I always think deserve particular praise. One of my favorites is right before he murders Shelley Winters when she's in bed and she kind of knows that he's going to kill her and she's like praying, and you have the wide shot. You have a natural frame of the steepled roof, and he's standing by the window with the moonlight coming in. He like raises up his hand. Oh, that shot gives me goosebumps every time.
I absolutely love the way they shoot some of those interior scenes. The house, they do it a couple times where like the house is so angular and expressionistic that they just make it completely black outside, so you feel like you're very contained inside this room.
Yeah.
They do the same thing a little bit later in the movie with the cellar. When he's going down the stairs, everything outside of what's at the cellar looks completely dark.
It almost looks like a stage set where like everything in front of a certain point is just black. It's incredible. And the shot of Shelley Winters' body in the car underwater, oh my god, that shot is insane.
Yeah.
With like the river grass and like her hair like flowing in the current.
And panning up even to the boat above with the fisherman having his hook.
Yeah, her brother.
Well, I think they call him uncle because he's like the general
uncle,
old town uncle.
The drunk uncle.
Everybody calls him, who lives on his little houseboat on the river. I don't think he's actually related to them.
Yeah,
he's
like that. Hard to tell.
He's a great character because like you have all the setup at the beginning with him and the little boy John like being friends and like repairing his father's skiff.
So delightfully platonic.
Yeah,
it's such a sweet little relationship. Like, oh man,
And he tells him he's like if you're that preacher gives me a bad feeling, like if you're ever in trouble come to Uncle Birdie and I'll take care of you. And then when they do go to him, he's completely useless. He's drunk, lying on the floor because he saw Shelley Winters' body in the car, and he won't go to the police because he thinks that they'll pin it on him.
I love that
for finding her body.
Like
so
him looking down at the water, and
so
you see the moment where he fails his will save. He just like loses it. It's great.
And so they like set him up as being like the good character that the kids can trust. That he's gonna be sort of like a savior, and then he's completely useless.
The moment falls,
and then they have to take the skiff and sail down the river,
which is great. I do want to talk about that setup because they've locked him in the cellar. They're running from him. They go to the one person who's been made clear can help them. He's incapacitated, and these children have nowhere else to go, and they remember the skiff that he'd repaired for them, which I love because it still gives like that character a degree of agency, even though he's like incapacitated in that sequence.
Right, he helped John repair the skiff.
So he still sort of remains relatively virtuous, which I like.
Sure,
and,
totally.
The kids go to the skiff. They're running along the riverbank, going to it. They're wading through the mud, and of course, at the top of the hill, is crowned by Mitchum.
Yeah,
and
I love that scene where he tries to chase them into the river, and he gets caught in the mud, and he tries to wade into the river, but at that point they're in the current and they're going down, and he just screams in rage.
This animal roar, and again, that's one of the first times we see him really lose his temper,
right.
And you see him for the monster that
for
we
the
knew
wolf
he
for
was.
the wolf in the sheep's clothing.
Oh yeah, and you know he's wearing that clothing, but to see him like take the cowl off and just be this hideous beast as the children float away, incredible. Because all those other moments is, I'm going to lose my temper, and then he just sets off in that sequence, and we finally see that. Oh God, so spooky, so spooky.
No, he's a fucking incredible villain. It's funny how much that scene is sort of paralleled by like the climax of the original Cape Fear, which he's also in. Also ends with him and Gregory Peck like fighting in the river and in the water.
Oh really?
Yeah, and it's shot similarly. It's not. Oh man,
might have to make that another pick.
The one part of this movie that I used to have more of a problem with, as I've watched this movie more times, it's become less of a problem for me, is the pacing of the third act.
Yeah, I agree with you. I have been bothered less by that by more viewings.
I loved
too.
it. Yeah.
I think it accelerates pretty well. It becomes a very different film, once they get onto the river and escape, and once they meet up with Lillian Gish. But I think in a good way.
For me, this film had a modern level of pacing. It's pretty consecutive, and whenever it does take its time, it's taking its time with a beautiful shot.
In terms of the idea of parable, it works really well to give Lillian Gish's character so much time as a foil to Mitchum.
Mm-hmm.
We need that time to set her up.
Yeah, I think that works well. I used to have a little bit more of a problem with how long that took. Additionally, I had a little bit of a problem with the Christmas ending.
Yeah, same, but I care less about that.
Exactly. The more I see it, though, the more it doesn't bother me, because I think in context of the whole movie, it's kind of a denouement of sorts.
I loved two bits, the relationship between her and Ruby.
Oh, yeah, Ruby.
Ruby's character that's a perspective we don't often get. And I liked. We don't need to dig into it, but I enjoyed that whole take. It's just the right level of unsettling.
I've been out having men buy me ice creams.
I fell in love with the serial killer because he said I look good.
I know. I did think I did think that was a little bit corny at the end when they're walking past the jail after he's been captured, and Ruby's like, "They know I love him." It's like he came to the house in the middle of the night and tried to murder these other kids that you're living with. Like, what are you talking about, Ruby? You dipshit.
Boys will be boys.
Boys will be boys. My only thing about the pacing that I do still think it bothers me a little bit, but not enough to have much of an impact on my impression of the movie, is I think there are times, especially at the very beginning and towards the end, where the editing is very weird.
In what way?
I'll use the beginning specifically, just like how hard some of the transition cuts are, where they don't feel like natural editing pacing. Like, we see the kids playing hide and seek at the beginning, and like the one kid runs to the cellar, and then it just like hard cuts to like the lady's legs, like in the cellar steps.
Oh, okay, yeah.
That's kind of weird. And like when Shelley Winters is talking to old lady Spoon, and she's like, "You need a man to help raise those kids." Hard cut to like the train and the bum bum bum, and then hard cut back to the ice cream shop. Is like, the Lord intended for the raising of children to be done by two people. Smash cut back to the train. Bum bum bum. Like that kind of stuff. I think it's a little bit sloppy. Yeah. I think it's more indicative of some of the filmmaking conventions of that time that I don't think have aged super well. Also, like when Mitchum does get into Miss Cooper's house at the end, and we see like the cat come down the stairs as like the kids are running up, and we see Lillian Gish, and then we just hear a meow, and it cuts to Robert Mitchum like popping up from the bottom of the screen, and he looks really surprised, and then Lillian Gish just shoots him, and then he runs off going, "Yo, whoa,
I love every bit about that.
I think him running.
It's goofy as fuck.
I think him running away whooping is funny, but just like
it's great. It's kind of spooky too.
Just like
I was kind of creeped out by it. It's like an animal like sound.
Yeah, but just like the cutting of that series of events of the cat to Lillian Gish to just the sound of the cat,
because we don't really know what happens with like, does the cat bite him? I don't get it. Like,
I think the cat startles him. I think that's what it's supposed to be.
Yeah, that's what I read.
That the cat startles him and that he comes up out of his hiding spot and she shoots him. I think that's what it's supposed to be, but you know, just like you were confused, I think that confusion comes because of the editing.
Yeah.
And
I dig that. Just a shot of like the cat bumping into him or something.
Right. Like there's just a few times where it feels like there needs to be like one more shot to sort of create like a continuity in the editing.
Well said.
But it's in such few parts of the film. Like I think for especially like the middle section, and it's so stylized and sort of dreamy too. I think it
much like the kids acting, it's masked over by the style.
The style helps it so much. Like I have a lot of good things to say about the writing and the direction and the performances in this movie. But that being said, I do think the style does so much of the heavy lifting.
When the editing's
that if this film was shot by a less competent cinematographer or done in a more high-key lighting style, I think the film would suffer greatly from it.
I agree.
I definitely think that the style does a lot of the heavy lifting in this case. You know, it's not a bad thing. Like some films are, you know, very much about creating an atmosphere and a mood, and I think this film does that extremely well.
Oh yeah.
And that the story and the characters and stuff are sort of meant to accompany that mood, and I think in this case they do it well. I love the scene with Lillian Gish sitting on the porch with her shotgun, and Robert Mitchum is outside at the gate sitting, and they're like singing together.
Oh, my mouth is just watering thinking about that shot. Yeah, we get this sort of clash of like two very different Christian philosophies,
right?
You know, or just being used for good and ill, but they both sing.
Yeah, they start singing the same hymn together, which is and then to have one of the girls Ruby come down with the candle and have the light from the candle obscure the screen, glaring, and so you can't see Mitchum anymore. And then Lillian Gish blows out the candle and he's gone.
Yeah, showing that Robert Mitchum is a true shinobi.
Yeah. I watched for it this time, and you can, if you look very carefully. When that light comes on, you can see him duck down below the window frame.
Oh, cool. You caught that. That's I love it when you have to look for it, because
it's one of those things, because like I've seen it so many times and I know the trick. So I was just curious to see if I could spot him leaving his position, and you can, but it's because the glare from the light pretty much blocks it. It's the kind of thing that if you're not laser focused on that part of the screen looking for that, you won't catch it.
Even better for the world building too, that you can, because he's not a specter, he's a person.
Right, and, exactly.
You know, but to give him that guise of being a specter, great stuff. I love how they hide things in shots, like children's faces.
How often they have him either in silhouette or have his shadow on a wall, especially like his shadow engulfing like one of the children or something. He very much has the effect of being a specter, even though like he's definitely just a man.
Yeah,
but
it definitely gives him that dark energy.
And considering that, you know, it
almost makes the second half of the film into a monster film,
right?
Like,
and I mean, considering that most of the film is from the perspective of children, to have him be sort of a larger than life dark presence is really effective.
Oh yeah, I mean a lot of those cinematography tricks that they use in the film, I mean they use for like Bela Lugosi movies. And
totally
stuff too, and I love that. I prefer it in this even, and I love those films.
I would even say that the cinematography in this film is inspired even more directly from like actual German expressionism than just from like film noir.
Oh yeah, like the cabinet played a role in this movie.
Like film noir came out of German expressionism, but like German expressionism has such like particular trademarks of like very sharp angles and stuff that, like you mentioned earlier, Ben, about the house being so angular and sharp edged, that that's the kind of stuff where I really think of things like the Cabinet of Dr. Caligari or like The Phantom Carriage or Vampire. You can really trace those roots back. And I mean, it's not too far in terms of time period. It's only, like 20 years removed from the peak of German Expressionism. So I've only ever seen one other film that Stanley Cortez shot, and that's Shot Corridor,
which we should cover at some point.
Which is a dope fucking that movie. Shot Corridor is great. But that's the only other film that I've seen shot by Stanley Cortez, and like he is such an incredible cinematographer.
I can't remember what else he's done.
As far as I remember, it's not a ton of note. Like, he shot some smaller films. And I mean, considering, the time, like The Night of the Hunter was a smaller film.
And a failure.
Yeah. It's just wild, man. I just like can't watch this film and imagine a mindset where people are like, this movie sucks. Maybe it is partially because of some of the critique of Christianity and
it's I think a large portion of people watching this film were too caught up in their Christian values to see it for what it is.
Well, I think it's just because it's in some ways abstract.
Also placing children in danger.
Yeah, early child endangerment.
Yeah, I mean, this is like Child Endangerment, the movie. And it's also, this film is a character-driven, like, psychologically driven style of horror.
Yeah.
And people liked monster movies then.
Right.
That's not the kind of thing people were looking for.
Like, we never see
even in your other standard dark noir films you're talking about at the time, there's still like a flawed good character and a villain of some sort. Like there's detective, bad, and criminal.
We never see any real violence against the kids, but like
there's some implied though.
There's plenty of it implied, and I mean the number of times that Robert Mitchum threatens them with his switchblade and like waves it in their face. It's like
that's intense now.
Yeah, like they're obviously on the film not going to show him doing anything to the kids, but you believe that he has no qualms about murdering those children.
Yeah, I mean you have a film where like you have a serial killer caught in a house with two children.
Yeah.
That was released in the 50s.
Yeah.
I'm not at all surprised that this film, didn't go over well. I'm bummed out by it, but I'm not surprised.
Another subtle touch that I want to talk about briefly, probably one of the last things that I want to bring up, but I love the scene where Pearl has like started making the bills into like paper dolls. The big reveal about halfway through is that the money is hidden in her doll that she carries everywhere with her. Yeah, she's sort of sitting outside on the cobblestones out front of the house, like tearing it up and making paper dolls and stuff. And John comes along and he's like, "Oh, what are you doing? Hide it." And he's helping her put it back in the doll. And then we see like Robert Mitchum like coming to the door behind them and being like, "What are you doing? Like, isn't it time you get off to bed?" Like, and they're still like shoving all of this money into the doll as he's coming down the stairs towards them, and they get it in the doll in time. But what I love is the shot where they like run up to him and they're like, the camera's down at his feet because that's where the kids are, and you see the little paper dolls of bills like blowing past his feet in the wind up under the house,
and you just don't know if he saw them or not, and either one could be believed. And of course he doesn't, and that reveal is placed later on. But you could almost buy that maybe he did for a scene or two later. You could think like, oh, maybe he's got it.
Right. Well, yeah, that's such a tense moment that he's like, about to catch them in the act, and like he's been looking for this money, and that once he has it, like the kids are no good to him anymore. At that point he's already murdered their mother, or maybe that's right before he does murder her. It's right before. I think it's like the next scene when he kills her is right after that. But like they're no use to him except for they know where the money is and he doesn't. So like to have the bills like blowing past his feet at that moment, it's like if he just looked down and saw those, he would know that they have the money with them. It's such a tense moment.
I only think I have one more scene to address, and then I've got everything covered. And we already talked about it a little bit, but the honeymoon sequence and how the dialogue does such a great job, and also the acting in that sequence as well. Overall, the mother like doesn't do much for me acting wise. Like a couple of her lines seem sort of flat, but she's portraying like a less intelligent character, so it works. But here, this one sequence, I actually very much so enjoyed her acting.
Yeah, I thought she did great.
And that was the scene just does this great job of dancing around what it's trying to say, and that's like she really needs sex. You can see it on her face. You can see that she's incredibly lonely and that she needs some sort of physical comfort.
Right.
And the way that he denies that from her is awesome, because still today we get so many of these fucking awful, like, rapey villains who are like, sex is always in their minds, like, oh, he's rapey or he's a creeper, so he must be a bad guy. And to have a character who is so wantonly evil and non-sexual, and like to deny her that, and like the evil act that he commits in that sequence is actually denying her love. It's awesome. It's great. Like, God, more of that in movies. It's fucking awesome.
Yeah, I love that. He's like, he says a woman's body is for procreating children. Are you trying to have any more children? And she's like, no. He's like, well, then you don't need to be thinking about that kind of thing.
Yeah. And it's great because like even then, like he addresses that, and like they never say it. You just see it on her face.
Right.
You know?
The great part of that too is they kind of build up his hatred of women's promiscuity
from his
earlier in
first
the movie, you know, like when he's at the burlesque show, and he's like getting visibly angry to the point where he like sticks his knife through his
he grabs his knife in his coat pocket and the blade pops out his pocket. That's a great shot. Especially because it's his hate hand.
Yeah.
We see the fist clench and go into his pocket. I do think that's funny. Is like, if you hate the idea of female promiscuity so much, why are you in that burlesque bar in the first place? Like, just to be mad?
Well, he gets off on it. He gets off on his hate.
Yeah, because I mean, he even says to himself, like, as at that moment before the cops come in and arrest him for stealing the car at the beginning, he like looks up at the sky and he's like, there's too many of them, isn't there? You can't kill a whole world. And it's why, too, like, his victims are all, like, women. They're all widows, you know, who are seeking affection and love, and in return, he murders them and takes their money. I really like especially in the 50s, too, like, I love the idea of, like, a non-sexual villain.
Or even you could pull from that he probably grew up homosexual. Like, he was probably gay. I mean, like, and turned to priesthood, you know, by societal confines, and that would also incur, like, towards his hate of women.
It's possible. I mean, I don't think there's anything in the film that really suggests that, but it's definitely
that's a running theme with priests.
He has some sort of deep-seated hatred for what he describes as like perfumed and lacy things. Like he has this very stark, like, hatred for the feminine.
Personally, I read that as an extension of his religious zealotry.
Yeah, I think that's
taking the words of the Bible and putting them to an extreme.
Right, there's so much in the Bible, especially in the Old Testament, about like the whore of Babylon and Jezebel, and like the idea of like women as evil seductresses. And I think that both of those readings that each of you have could be correct and could go hand in hand.
I would say that there's no reason it can't be both. I'm actually implying that.
Yeah.
Like, I think it's definitely what Ben just said. Like, it's definitely that. And I'm saying that often that is the case with, you know, people who are, you know, born homosexual and are pinned into that position societally.
Yeah.
You know, and that's where that comes out.
Yeah.
And, you know, because, like, the Bible is utilized as an excuse to convert, you know, them to hatred.
Right.
And it's fucking powerful shit, man. Like, and the movie didn't need to say anything else about it.
Yeah,
at all. I'm not asking for it to. I'm just speculating.
I don't want to go full J.K. Rowling and give an identity to a character that didn't have that identity in the work.
For sure. You know? And I also think that we don't want to stray too close to the rather old-fashioned idea in a lot of movies of like homosexuality being repressed and creating deviance. there's definitely that old trope of like the gay killer and stuff who,
Sure.
you know, can't be, you know, who, because of his deviancy, he doesn't have a way, quote unquote, deviancy, doesn't have a way to express it. So he turns to violence. But I do think that is an interesting possibility. The two ideas that y'all posit are not mutually exclusive. And I think it's interesting that there is a degree of like characterization for Robert Mitchum that you can speculate on those things. I would say that he is by far the most nuanced character in the film. Distinctly evil, but definitely more fleshed out than the kids.
Yeah. Like any good serial killer film.
Is it rating time?
I think so,
else?
yeah. I feel good about it, yeah.
Well, why don't you start, Cleveland?
That's my usual spiel. I recognize that there's no such thing as a perfect film, but this film is perfect for me. It's a 5 out of 5.
Ben?
Yeah, I mean, this movie is an American classic. It's probably top 10, top 20 of my favorite movies of all time. It's a perfect parable. The minor problems with the third act have kind of disappeared as I've seen it more and as I've grown older.
Disappeared or at least become preferential.
Yeah, and I think in context, as the more you watch it and the more you read some of the things they're trying to go at, especially with the foil between the two characters, I think it becomes more intentional and less bothersome. And a lot of times the problems of this movie is masked by how great the style is.
Totally.
And kind of the interpretive, expressionistic nature of it. It's a 5 out of 5 for me.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and say same. It's a 5 out of 5 for me as well. My first couple of times watching it, the sort of like corny Hallmark Christmas ending frustrated me because I loved the dark moodiness of the film so much. I'm like, why do you have to end on such a stereotypical happy ending that's like is the 50s, you know? It's and you want this kind of story to have an uplifting message by the end, I think.
I'll tell you, I love dark ending films, but for me now, I wouldn't have wanted that film to have a dark ending. I personally am very happy that it had a positive ending.
I've definitely come around on it a lot. I think that it actually ends the way it needs to, and aside from my slight little problems with the editing here and there, I also just think that that's kind of hallmarks of the time, and for what the film is, like, it's so good at creating this just like powerful, dark, eerie atmosphere, and like Robert Mitchum is a god amongst actors. Pretty much everything about this movie is perfect, and the minor problems I have with it are not enough to take away that perfection. So yeah, it's definitely a 5 out of 5 for me. So that's unanimous. 5 out of 5 pods. Another golden pod.
Yes.
Joining the hallowed halls. And if you like classic movies, definitely check this one out.
Yeah.
If you like film noir, if you like good acting, it's not everywhere in this movie, but Lillian Gish and Robert Mitchum are powerhouses.
And where it isn't is more than tolerable.
It's fine. Yeah, it's I think that this is an incredible movie. It's probably my favorite film of that era.
Do you guys want to get angry? I found a Metacritic corner for us.
Oh, you have a Metacritic corner.
Yeah, mixing it up.
This episode is sponsored by Rage. Here we go.
You freaking bricks! When will you learn? When will you learn that your actions have consequences?
Okay, so this review comes from Uncle Earl.
Good.
It's a good start.
And he gave it 1 out of 10. There has never been a more overrated movie to ever waste space in a film reel.
That's not
Whoa.
true.
I'm pretty
Back, Uncle Earl.
I'm pretty sure everyone who gives it a good rating is attesting it solely on Mitchum's acting. He carries the movie alone, and even then, it still sinks to rock bottom. Every single other actor is annoying, incompetent, or both. The plot rarely resolves anything it introduces in the story, Like it's dragging its legs over jagged rocks and not trying to correct this. The conclusion came from absolutely nowhere. It's like everyone who was a part of this was hired to make a movie together, and none of them had actually seen one before. The whole thing worked better as a novel where you don't have to accordion everything into a short 2-hour video and require on actors to convey the work. I give it a 1 because Mitchum wasn't god-awful in this.
This film ties everything off with a bow. What the fuck is he
knows
talking about?
He knows that this movie came out in 1954, right? And there was no such thing as video.
I wouldn't put it past.
This is your drunk uncle at Thanksgiving. Shut up. Go home, Uncle Earl. You're drunk. Nobody wants to hear what you have to say.
Right.
No, nobody wants to hear your opinions on the immigrants or the wall. Like, shut the fuck up, you asshole. Oh my god, yeah, that's extremely frustrating.
Wow.
What I was not expecting from that review was the book is better than the movie.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess I'm a little sold on reading the book now.
I'd be curious to read the book. I always forget that this movie is based on a book because I see that at the beginning of the film, and by the end, I don't give a shit anymore because the movie is so good.
When will you learn that your actions have consequences?
Oh, I hate to bring up something else after we've rated, but I did have one thing that I'd lament not mentioning.
Okay.
And that is the very shaky expository shots.
Oh
at the
my
beginning
god,
of this
and
film.
the helicopter shots.
They're
Jesus
very
Christ.
shaky, and
It's
I was
hard to
thinking
shoot in
about
a
it.
helicopter,
I was
man.
thinking about it, and I know exactly why they made it into the final edit, and that's, or I think I have a speculation, and that's they saw it. And they were, ready to put it on the cutting room floor, and they just said, yeah, but we spent so much money on these. We got a helicopter and everything to get these shots. Yeah, but they're shaky as hell. Yeah, but we paid for it. And it stayed in the film. Because, you could have just taken a fucking still from those shots and just, just faded in and out, and it would have been fine.
I can also
more than fine.
I can also say with a fair amount of confidence that the Blu-ray high resolution cut of this film makes those shots look worse.
Well, and the thing is too, getting a shot on a helicopter in the 50s
hard.
Very hard, and honestly, it was pretty standard for them to be a little shaky. Stability wasn't a strong.
Yeah, I'm not asking for a drone shot. Just give me a still instead.
I know. I agree. I agree with you. I have seen lower res cuts of this film where the shots were shaky, but not that bad.
Mm-hmm.
Like watching it in this resolution this time on a nice sized TV.
It's like motion sickness.
It makes a difference. You can really notice that kind of stuff. You can.
I'd still 100% recommend it in Blu-ray. It's gorgeous.
Oh yeah, 100%.
The Criterion comes with the whole second disc with a 2.5 hour making of thing.
I want to watch it. Oh, I'm gonna watch it.
Yeah, I haven't seen that either, but a full feature length making of this movie, I would love to see that.
Please.
Well, anyway, I think we've gushed about this movie enough, so that'll bring us to the end of this week's episode. Next week, we're going to be covering another new film, the Guillermo del Toro produced Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark, which I'm pretty hyped for. I'm trying to keep my expectations low, but those were some of my favorite books as a kid that got me into horror, and the fact that they're using the legitimately nightmarish illustrations of those books as a visual reference for so much in the film. They're straight from those illustrations, and that gets me very hyped.
The trailers so far are very spooky.
I am concerned. I hope I'm wrong. I'm concerned that rendering those illustrations in CG will take some of the magic away from them for me. I'm a little concerned going in. Those books are a huge inspiration to me too, and I don't know.
From the trailers it looks like they did it right. But we'll have to see. What makes me the most nervous about this is that Guillermo del Toro only produced this film and is not directing it. I have never heard of the director who shot this movie. We'll get into that next week, but I'm scared of it being a Mama situation all over again, because Del Toro produced that movie, and it's not a great movie.
Yep. Those illustrations still scare me.
However,
we can get into that.
We'll get into that. I'm excited for the movie. I hope it doesn't let me down like some other movies have this year. That's all I'm saying. But tune in next week to hear our full thoughts. And go see the movie yourself if you're interested.
Yeah.
And other than that, we just got the same spiel we always got. If you like the show, go on to Apple Podcasts or wherever else you get your podcasts and make a deposit of a 5-star rating and a nice review, and you can then make a withdrawal of
an episode
and our undying love and appreciation. And also you can follow us on Twitter at PodPeoplePod, mostly just for GIFs. I've taken to posting GIFs on the Twitter.
Is it GIFs or GIFs?
No.
I'm not having this argument on the podcast. But you can also follow us on Letterboxd. If you have a Letterboxd, just search for us, Pod People Pod, on Letterboxd, where you can find a list of all the films we've talked about on the show with our ratings and the links to those reviews. And you can also see our list of Golden Pods, which now has its newest member in The Night of the Hunter. Slowly growing. I think this is our 5th perfect film.
I think we're above that at this point. Yeah.
Check out Letterboxd to find out. You can follow me on Twitter at Mr. Van Awesome and support me in my quest to become a Twitter guy.
I'm on Twitter at Mr. Sheets, and you can also pick up my music at eatenbynostalgia.bandcamp.com. It's also on streaming services everywhere.
And you can find me tweeting for Light Arc Studio as we work to continue working at putting out our delightful work that we've been working so hard on. It Stares Back. And yeah, enjoy the shit out of it. It's on Steam. Check it out. It Stares Back.
Yeah, by the time this episode comes out, we might have a new update out.
We should. Yeah, we should by then.
With our
level editor,
our all new level editor.
Make your own levels. It's gonna be fun.
And a set of community made map pack.
That's right.
Maps.
Yeah. Come join our Discord if you want to make some levels with us. It's a whole fun freaking time we're having in there.
Yeah.
Having a damn blast.
But otherwise, you can just play the game on Steam. It Stares Back. $6 for now.
For now.
For now.
Okay, getting better. We got plans.
All right. Well, thank you as always for listening. Check back next week for our review of Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. And until then, keep leaning on those everlasting arms, baby.
On the everlasting arms. What a blessedness. What a peace is mine. Leaning on the everlasting arms.
Leaning on Jesus, leaning on Jesus, safe and secure from all.